Falling through a fluid. Here we have a person in a hot air balloon. I've used a hot air balloon rather than an aeroplane so we can focus on the downwards motion and there's no horizontal motion. The instant they jump out of the basket, they are not moving, so there's no air resistance, just the weight acting down. Therefore the resultant force is equal to the weight acting down. They accelerate down rapidly. A few moments later they've moved away from the balloon. Their weight hasn't changed, but they're now moving down, so there is air resistance acting up. The resultant force is the weight minus the air resistance, and so they now have a smaller resultant force than before. They accelerate down less rapidly. Sometime later they're further from the balloon. The weight hasn't changed. The air resistance now equals the weight. The resultant force is 0 newtons. They'll continue to travel at a constant speed, known as their terminal velocity. This is at around about 130 miles an hour. When they pull their parachute, the weight doesn't change, but the air resistance is now much bigger. This causes an upwards resultant force. They don't move up, but they do decelerate rapidly. Sometime later, the weight hasn't changed. They're now moving more slowly, and so the air resistance is less. They still have a small upwards resultant force, so they're now decelerating less rapidly. Eventually, they slow down enough that the air resistance equals the weight, and they now have no resultant force, and travel at a constant speed, their terminal velocity. But with the parachute this is now around 5 miles an hour. With no parachute it was around 130 miles an hour. When they hit the ground, the weight doesn't change, but there's now a large upwards contact force, causing them to have an upwards resultant force, and they decelerate very rapidly. But then moments later, the weight is equalled by the contact force, they have no resultant force, and they're stationary on the ground. We can look at a graph of velocity against time for the parachutist. It goes something like this. At first, their velocity increases very rapidly, up to terminal velocity with no parachute, like I said, around 130 miles an hour. Here, they open the parachute, and their velocity reduces very rapidly to their new terminal velocity with a parachute, around 5 miles an hour. At this point, they hit the ground, and their velocity almost instantly becomes 0.